Hi there. Now, you wait a year for another reaction video to come along, and then there are two in a week, like London buses. However, it's just unavoidable because the next novel I read after Murakami's Dance, Dance, Dance was Alice Walker's Now is the Time to Open Your Heart, and again, it was flawed, yet I felt it was worth speaking about, and actually, I'm going to connect it with Murakami's novel, so you may wish to watch my video on that. This isn't a kind of cheap form of cross promotion. It just so happens that there are intriguing connections between these two works. Alright, let's get started with a brief summary of Walker's novel. The novel centers on two middle-aged and new-age African Americans, Kate Talkingtree, a successful writer, and her partner Yolo, an artist, and their relationship is reaching a crisis point, and so they set off independently on journeys. Kate's is intentionally one of self-discovery. First she goes on a river trip in Colorado, then another river trip to the Amazon where she joins a circle and takes ayahuasca, and we learn the histories of the other members of the circle and the traumatic events from which they are attempting to recover. Yolo's vacation is supposed to just be kicking back in Hawaii, but he's quickly drawn in by strange events into the life of the impoverished islanders and reconnects with an old flame, Alma, and it ends up being a journey of self-discovery, which he hadn't intended. At the end, Kate and Yolo reunite at the airport and discover that their individual journeys have strengthened their bond, and to mark this fact, they stage a very New Age ceremony by a river to which they invite many of the characters they've encountered on their respective journeys, and that provides the novel's happy ending. The primary virtue of Walker's novel is its moral and ethical seriousness, and actually she so prioritizes this that the writing suffers in effect, which I think is quite courageous. There is material in here that I simply can't extract and read out because it will appear ridiculous. It's very easy to sneer and mock such open-hearted writing, which for me is very praiseworthy, to take on such heavy questions as basically how should we seek to free ourselves from all forms of domination. So its virtue also detracts from it as a work of art, sadly. Okay, now let's speak about the rather strange connection between this novel and Dance, Dance, Dance by Haruki Murakami. I don't know if this ever happens to you, but you finish one novel and then pick up another seemingly at random, only to find this second novel speaking to the previous one, and that is what I found with Now is the Time to Open Your Heart. It spoke to Murakami's novel in at least three ways, all of them to the detriment, it has to be said, of Dance, Dance, Dance. Firstly, both novels have a sequence set in Hawaii, but whereas in Murakami you have this ironic mode of consumption of the picture-perfect Hawaiian vacation, complete with sexual exploitation of the island's women, in Now is the Time to Open Your Heart, Yolo begins in that mode, but events draw him into the real life of the impoverished Hawaiian population in a much more interesting way. Also, the attempt to deal with trauma in Dance, 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 the narrator is very self-involved and is really only interested in his own suffering, whereas in Walker's novel you have the circle, this communal attempt at healing, and that was far more interesting and wholesome than what we find in Murakami. And lastly, and perhaps most amusingly, Murakami's novel is saturated with references to popular culture, movies, songs, bands. That's one of the pleasures of reading it. Whereas in Walker's novel, the curandero warns the people in the circle to turn away from such celebrity culture because it distracts from entering your inner world where you can seek healing. So what those three things point to is how ethically serious Walker's novel is, and how Murakami deals with ethics in such a trivial and at times repugnant way. I'll just give one more example from Dance, Dance, Dance. The narrator turns down repeatedly the offer of money from the father of the teenage girl he's hanging out with, and yet when his movie star buddy tells him that he thinks he may have murdered someone, he's prepared to overlook that fact because he's a good friend. Total ethical confusion. Okay, let's move on to the defects of Walker's novel. There are two primary defects with Now is the Time to Open Your Heart, one of which may seem trivial, but believe me, when you're reading this book, it keeps rising to the surface, and that is, it's in a very strange format, and it's basically too big for your hand. Thank goodness. Most books are not produced in this format. It's not that my hands are particularly small. I believe them to be larger than Donald Trump's, but that was an issue with trying to read this book. The major defect, however, is it tries to do too much in the course of its 200 pages, and basically I would break apart 5 of its themes and read a separate book on each of them, and I'll recommend what those might be. So firstly, on the question of collective trauma, structural violence, I would say it's better to read Paul Farmer's Pathologies of Power, a wonderful work of anthropology by a Harvard doctor. Then another Harvard educated person, it's Wade Davis, the ethnobotanist, and his One River, an account of his adventures in the Amazon. Then the psychonaut, Daniel Pinchbeck, Breaking Open the Head, which goes more deeply into the experiences with all kinds of psychedelic drugs in jungles around the world. Then a book on shamanism. I've got so many of these, but I've picked out Dance of the Four Winds. I have another one, Gift of Power, by a Lakota medicine man, which is also excellent. And finally, Terence McKenna's Food of the Gods. Just reading one, a combination of, or indeed all of those recommendations takes you so much more deeply into the subject matter Walker is attempting to engage with. So there we have it, a morally and ethically serious novel, rather let down by its lack of depth. Never mind, I did enjoy it on the whole. Now all that remains is for me to bid you farewell. So until the next time, be safe, be strong, Nanu Nanu.